Davy Crockett. David Crockett was born August 17, 1786. He died March 6, 1836. He was an American folk hero, frontiersman, soldier, and politician. He is commonly referred to in popular culture by the epithet King of the Wild Frontier. He represented Tennessee in the U.S. House of Representatives and served in the Texas Revolution. Davy Crockett grew up in East Tennessee, where he gained a reputation for hunting and storytelling. He was made a colonel of the militia of Lawrence County, Tennessee, and was elected to the Tennessee State Legislature in 1821. In 1827, he was elected to the U.S. Congress, where he vehemently opposed many of the policies of President Andrew Jackson, especially the Indian Removal Act. Crockett's opposition to Jackson's policies led to his defeat in 1831 elections. He was re-elected in 1833, then narrowly lost in 1835, prompting his angry departure to Texas shortly thereafter. In early 1836, he took part in the Texas Revolution and was likely executed at the Battle of Alamo after being captured by the Mexican army. Crockett became famous during his lifetime for larger-than-life exploits, popularized by stage plays and almanacs. After his death he continued to be credited with acts of mythical proportion. Those led in the 20th century to television and movie portrayals, and he became one of the best-known American folk heroes. Andrew Jackson was appointed Major General of the Tennessee Militia in 1802. The Fort Mims Massacre occurred near Mobile, Mississippi Territory on August 30, 1813, and became a rallying cry for the Creek War. On September 20, Davy Crockett left his family and enlisted as a scout for an initial term of 90 days with Francis Jones' company of mounted riflemen, part of the 2nd Regiment of Volunteer Mounted Riflemen. They served under Colonel John Coffee in the war, marching south into present-day Alabama and taking an active part in the fighting. Crockett often hunted wild game for the soldiers and felt better suited to that role than killing Creek warriors. He served until December 24, 1813. The War of 1812 was being waged concurrently with the Creek War. After the Treaty of Fort Jackson in August 1814, Andrew Jackson, now with the U.S. Army, wanted the British forces ousted from Spanish Florida and asked for support from the Tennessee militia. Crockett re-enlisted as a 3rd sergeant for a 6-month term with the Tennessee Mounted Gunmen under Captain John Cowan on September 28, 1814. Crockett's unit saw little of the main action because they were days behind the rest of the troops and were focused mostly on foraging for food. Crockett returned home in December. He was still on a military reserve status until March 1815. so he hired a young man to fulfill the remainder of his service. In 1817, Crockett moved the family to the acreage in Lawrence County, where he first entered public office as a commissioner helping to configure the new county's boundaries. On November 25th, the state legislature appointed him County Justice of the Peace. On March 27, 1818, he was elected Lieutenant Colonel of the 57th Regiment of Tennessee Militia, defending candidate Daniel Matthews for the position. By 1819, Crockett was operating multiple businesses in the area and felt his public responsibilities were beginning to consume so much of his time and energy that he had little left time for either family or business. He resigned from the office of Justice of the Peace and from his position with the regiment. Tennessee General Assembly. In 1821, he resigned as commissioner and successfully ran for a seat in the Tennessee General Assembly, representing Lawrence and Hickman counties. It was this election where Crockett honed his anecdotal oratory skills. He was appointed to the Committee of Propositions and Grievances on September 17, 1821, and served through the first session that ended November 17, as well as the special session caused by the governor in the summer of 1822, ending on August 24. He favored legislation to ease the tax burden on the poor. Crockett spent his entire legislative career fighting for the rights of impoverished settlers who he felt dangled on the precipice of losing title to their land due to the state's complicated system of grants. He supported 1821 gubernatorial candidate William Carroll over Andrew Jackson's endorsed candidate Edward Ward. Less than 2 weeks after Crockett's 1821 election to the General Assembly, a flood of the Tennessee River destroyed Crockett's businesses. In November, Elizabeth's father, Robert Patton, deeded 800 acres of his Carroll County property to Crockett. Crockett sold off most of the acreage to help settle his debts and moved his family to the remaining acreage on the Obion River, which remained in Carroll County until 1825, when the boundaries were reconfigured and put in Gibson County. In 1823, he ran against Andrew Jackson's nephew-in-law, William Edward Butler, and won a seat in the General Assembly representing the counties of Carroll, Humphreys, Perry, Henderson, and Madison. He served in the first session, which ran from September through the end of November 1823, and in the second session that ran September through the end of November 1824, championing the rights of the impoverished farmers. During Andrew Jackson's election to the United States Senate in 1823, Crockett backed his opponent, John Williams. On October 25, 1824, Crockett notified his constituents of his intention to run in the 1825 election for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. He lost that election to an incumbent, Adam Alexander. A chance meeting in 1826 gained him the encouragement of Memphis Mayor Marcus Winchester to try again to win a seat in Congress. The Jackson Gazette published a letter from Crockett on September 15, 1826, announcing his intention of again challenging Rankin and stating his opposition to the policies of President John Quincy Adams and Secretary of State Henry Clay, and to Rankin's position on the cotton tariff. Militia veteran William Arnold also entered the race, and Crockett easily defeated both political opponents for the 1827 to 1829 term. He arrived in Washington, D.C., and took up residence at Mrs. Ball's boarding house, where a number of other legislators lived when Congress was in session. Jackson was elected as president. In 1828, Crockett continued his legislative focus on settlers getting a fair deal for land titles, offering H.R. 27, amendment to a bill sponsored by James Polk. Crockett was re-elected for the 1829-31 session, once again defeating Adam Alexander. He introduced H.R. 185 amendment to the land bill on January 29, 1830, but it was defeated on May 3rd. On February 25, 1830, he introduced a resolution to abolish the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, because he felt it was public money going to benefit the sons of wealthy men. He spoke out against Congress giving $100,000 to the widow of Stephen Decatur, citing that Congress was not empowered to do that. He opposed Jackson's 1830 Indian Removal Act and was the only member of the Tennessee delegation to vote against it. Cherokee Chief John Ross sent him a letter on January 13, 1831, expressing his thanks for Crockett's vote. His vote was not popular with his own district, and he was defeated in 1831 election by William Fitzgerald. Crockett ran against Fitzgerald again in 1833 election and was returned to Congress, serving until 1835. On January 2nd, 1834, he introduced the land title resolution H.R. 126, but it never made it as far as being debated on the House floor. He was defeated for re-election in the August 1835 election by Adam Huntsman. During his last term in Congress, he collaborated with Kentucky Congressman Thomas Chilton to write his autobiography, which was published by E.L. Carey and A. Hart in 1834 as a narrative of the life of David Crockett, written by himself. And he went east to promote the book. In 1836, newspapers published the now famous quotation attributed to Crockett upon his return to his home state. I told the people of my district that I would serve them as faithfully as I have done, but if not, they might go to hell and I would go to Texas. By December 1834, Crockett was writing to friends about moving to Texas if Jackson's chosen successor, Martin Byrd, was elected president. The next year, he discussed with his friend Benjamin McCullough raising a company of volunteers to take to Texas in the expectation that a revolution was imminent. His departure to Texas was delayed by a court appearance in the last week of October as co-executor of his deceased father-in-law's estate. He finally left his home near Rutherford in West Tennessee with 3 other men on November 1st, 1835, to explore Texas. His youngest child, Matilda, later wrote that she distinctly remembered the last time that she saw her father. He was dressed in his hunting suit, wearing a coonskin cap, and carried a fine rifle presented to him by friends in Philadelphia. He seemed very confident the morning he went away that he would soon have us all to join him in Texas. Crockett traveled with 30 well-armed men to Jackson, Tennessee. where he gave a speech from the steps of the Madison County Courthouse, and they arrived in Little Rock, Arkansas on November 12, 1835. The local newspapers reported that hundreds of people swarmed into town to get a look at Crockett, and a group of leading citizens put on a dinner in his honor that night at the Jeffries Hotel. Crockett spoke mainly to the subject of Texan independence as well as Washington politics. Crockett arrived in Nacogdoches, Texas in early January 1836. On January 14, he and 65 other men signed an oath before Judge John Forbes to the provisional government of Texas for 6 months. I have taken the oath of government and have enrolled my name as a volunteer and was set out for the Rio Grande in a few days with the volunteers from the United States. Each man was promised about 4,600 acres of land as payment. On February 6, he and 5 other men rode into San Antonio and camped just outside the town. Crockett arrived at the Alamo mission in San Antonio on February 8. A Mexican army arrived on February 23rd, led by General Antonio. Surprising the men garrisoned in the Alamo, and the Mexican soldiers immediately initiated a siege. Santa Anna ordered his artillery to keep up a near constant bombardment. The guns were moved closer to the Alamo each day, increasing their effectiveness. On February 25th, 200 to 300 Mexican soldiers crossed the San Antonio River and took cover in abandoned shacks approximately 90 to 100 yards from the Alamo walls. The soldiers intended to use the huts as cover to establish another artillery position, although many Texans assumed that they actually were launching an assault on the fort. Several men volunteered to burn the huts. To provide cover, the Alamo cannons fired grape shot at the Mexican soldiers, and Crockett and his men fired rifles, while other defenders reloaded extra weapons for them to use in maintaining a steady fire. The battle was over within 90 minutes, and the Mexican soldiers retreated. There were limited stores of powder and shot inside the Alamo. The Alamo commander William Barrett Travis ordered the artillery to stop returning fire on February 26 so as to conserve precious ammunition. Crockett and his men were encouraged to keep shooting, as they were usually effective. As the siege progressed, Travis sent many messages asking for reinforcements. Several messengers were sent to James Fannin, who commanded the group of Texan soldiers at Presidio, La Bahia, and Goliad, Texas. Fannin decided that it was too risky to reinforce the Alamo. Although historian Texas Thomas Ricks Lindley concludes that up to 50 of Fannin's men left his command to go to the Bexar. These men would have reached Cibolo Creek on the afternoon of March 3, 35 miles from the Alamo, where they joined another group of men who also planned to join the garrison. There was a skirmish between Mexican and Texan troops that same night outside the Alamo. Historian Walter Lord speculates that the Texans were creating a diversion to allow their courier John Smith to evade Mexican pickets. However, Alamo survivor Susanna Dickinson said in 1876 that Travis sent out 3 men shortly after dark on March 3, probably a response to the arrival of Mexican reinforcements. The 3 men, including Crockett, were sent to find Fannin. Lindley states that Crockett and one of the other men found a force of Texans waiting along Cibolo Creek Just before midnight, they had advanced to within 20 miles of the Alamo. Just before daylight on March 4, part of the Texan force managed to break through the Mexican lines and enter the Alamo. A second group was driven across the prairie by Mexican cavalry. The siege ended on March 6 when the Mexican army attacked just before dawn while the defenders were sleeping. The daily artillery bombardment had been suspended, perhaps to ploy to encourage the natural human reaction to a concession of constant strain. But the garrison awakened and the final fight began. Most of the new non-combatants gathered in the church sarcastically for safety. According to Dickinson, Crockett paused briefly in the chapel to say a prayer before running to his post. The Mexican soldiers climbed up the north church outer walls of the Alamo complex, and most of the Texans fell back to the barracks and the chapel and previously planned. Crockett and his men, however, were too far from the barracks to take shelter and were the last remaining group to be in the open. They defended the low wall in front of the church, using their rifles as clubs and relying on knives, as the action was too furious to allow reloading. After a volley and a charge with bayonets, Mexican soldiers pushed the few remaining defenders back toward the church. The Battle of the Alamo lasted almost 90 minutes, and all of the defenders were killed. Santa Anna ordered his men to take their bodies to a nearby stand of trees where they were stacked together and wood piled up. That evening, they lit a fire and burned their bodies to ashes. The ashes were left undisturbed until February 1837, when Juan Seguin and his cavalry returned to Bexar to examine the remains. A local carpenter created a simple coffin, and the ashes from the funeral pyres were placed inside. The names of Travis, Crockett, and Bowie were inscribed on the lid. The coffin is thought to have been buried in a peach grove, but the spot was not marked and can no longer be identified. All that is certain about the fate of David Crockett is that he died at the Alamo on the evening of March 6, 1836, at age 49. According to many accounts, between 5 and 7 Texans surrendered during the battle, possibly to General Castrillon. Santa Anna had ordered the Mexicans to take no prisoners. He was incensed that those orders had been ignored. He demanded the immediate execution of the survivors, but Castrillon and several other officers refused to do so. Staff officers who had not participated in the fighting drew their swords and killed the unarmed Texans.